Some subroutines rely on your data containing a specific value. For example, you might want to return the date that Two Trees sold their first bottle of basil-infused olive oil. You can press Ctrl-F to use the Find dialog box through the user interface, but you can also find values using VBA code. So I'll switch over to the Visual Basic Editor, Alt F11. To find the first occurrence of a value within a worksheet, you must use the rangeObjects find method to locate the value. The code you use appears here in the Find This Value subroutine. The first thing I do is display an input box that asks the user for the value they want to find. Next, I use an onError statement to tell the program that in case there is an error, that it should go to the line with the label handler. And that is down here. So if the user types in a value that does not occur within the worksheet, we come down here to handler and display a message box called value not found. So that's the error handling. But the next line is how we find the value within the worksheet. We use the cells object. Now, cells is a type of range object, so we can still use the rangeObjects method of find. And then we need to tell the find object what to look for. In this case, we have what and look at. There are two ways that you can specify function arguments in Excel VBA. The first is by order, where you have commas separating the function arguments and everything is in a known order. Or you can use labels, and that is the name of the function argument, in this case what, or look at, followed by a colon and an equal sign, and then whatever value you want to assign to that argument. So in this case, I'm using the find methods what and look at arguments. Find returns the address of a cell, so at the end I use the activate method to activate that cell. And again, that's the goal of this subroutine, to find and activate the cell that contains the value that the user inputs here. Just to show you what that looks like, I'll press F5 to run it. It asks which value we want to find. I will type in basil and press OK. I ran it from inside the Visual Basic Editor, so we returned there, but if I press Alt F11, we go back, you see that the function worked as expected and highlighted the first cell that contains the value basil. Notice that the second occurrence of basil occurs here, but this function only returns the first one. You might have noticed that I have this line of code here commented out, ActiveWorkbook.ActiveSheet followed by a period. What that is the indication of what would have been written to the left of the cells object if we had had to put it in there. In other words, there are times in Excel VBA when certain things are optional. For example, we're in the active workbook, that's assumed. We're on the active sheet, that's also assumed. So that means that when cells, which is the collection of all cells inside the active sheet, is used, you don't have to specify active workbook, active sheet. But let's see what happens if I put those back in. So if I take away the commenting and bring cells up to the same line, so we have a full specification. And if I press F5, and this time I will look for Mandarin, press OK, Alt F11, you see the macro works exactly as before. You can't always use shortcuts like this, but if you're able to, it can make your code a lot shorter and easier to read. Now let's say that I want to find the address of the first cell that contains the value entered into the input box. To find the address, I use the same find method, but this time I put the address property at the end of the line of code. So I have that example here in the find cell address subroutine. When I run this macro, this time I look for Rosemary. Instead of selecting the cell that contained the value, the subroutine displays a message box indicating the address, which in this case is cell C7. The find method has a lot of options, such as the direction of the search, whether you want to match upper and lowercase letters, and so on. Rather than fight through all those permutations, I recommend you record a macro with exactly the settings you want and edit it to allow user input.